It was brought to my attention in comments of my last video, life hacks, that I kind of left you hanging. I didn't give any examples of my life hacks, which is true. My ADHD got to me, especially when I hit record, couldn't get my thoughts together. No, don't go anywhere. Your audio's just fine. See, you're experiencing what we call zone out. Yeah, you're trying to have a conversation, and then all of a sudden you remember there's a task at work you forgot to do. It's a very important task. My boss said it needed to be done today. So now that's all you can think about. Now your hearing starts to fade just a little bit, because now all of a sudden you're having a conversation with your boss. Imaginary, of course, and let's just face it, you're going to get talked to, if not possibly even yelled at. Now your hearing is totally gone. You can't hear ambient noises. Nobody in the background. No cars passing by. You can't even feel what's going on. Somebody could be standing right next to you and you wouldn't even know, because to you, in your head, you're in your boss's office having this imaginary conversation. You're trying to come up with a response that doesn't make you look incompetent or like you don't know what you're doing. And you're definitely trying to hide the fact that it's your ADHD that made you forget about this task. And the whole time, you're staring him in the eye. You're nodding your head. And not only that, you might even come out with a, really? Can't believe it. But you have no idea what he's saying. You don't know where he is in the conversation. And I would almost say you barely know he's there. And that, in a nutshell, is what it's like to have inattentive ADHD. And that's also why we're called space cadets and daydreamers, because that happens quite often. All right, you guys get the point, right? He could go. Wait. Hey, he left his drink. All right, let's talk about inattentive ADHD. The first thing I want to say is we're usually overlooked. The reason why is because we're sitting in the corner minding our own business, staring out the window, just daydreaming. That could be for a lot of reasons, but we could have a lot of thoughts going in our head, and we're trying to organize those thoughts, and our brain just goes, it's just easier to daydream about anything else. Or we could be stuck on one thought, a good idea, a past event, a debate or argument that's going over and over and over in your head. But our hyperactivity, like I said, is internal. Unlike our hyperactive counterpart, they have to keep going, they have to keep moving. They're jumping from project to project to project, all that type of stuff. People could see that, and it's probably easier to diagnose. For us, it's not that easy, mainly because we could sit still for long periods of time. As a matter of fact, we do have hyperactive tendencies, I should say. When we sit still for long periods of time, we're shaking our legs, we're tapping our pencils, we're chewing on our pencils. Some people bite their nails. Me, I talk with my hands a lot. I don't know if that's an ADHD thing. I haven't heard that's an ADHD thing, to be perfectly honest. It could be. So I'm gonna chop that up. If you talk with your hands a lot and you have ADHD, let me know, because I do it a lot. Anyway, moving on. When you're a child, before anybody probably even thinks of inattentive ADHD, you're probably going to get evaluated for a learning disability. A couple of reasons. Obviously we've got the zone out and the not paying attention and focusing and stuff like that. But there is something that goes into our brain when it comes to processing, especially verbal information. When we're trying to process it, sometimes our brains work a little slower than normal, if normal could be defined, I guess you could say. What I mean by that is, have you ever had anybody ask you a question and you responded with, "I'm sorry, what?" And then they started to repeat the question, and then you answered the question? That's because you heard the question, you understood what the question was, but it's almost like your brain needed a couple extra seconds to kind of formulate the response. It didn't process all the way, I guess you could say, if that makes sense. I understand it because it happens to me all the time. My father used to hate it, and then after a while, my father would ask me a question, I would respond with what, and he would go, "You heard me," and I would go, "Yeah, this time I was actually zoning out. I didn't hear you this time. And I really couldn't say that because I was 8, 9 years old, and I didn't want to look embarrassed." Anyway, you move that into school, they see that the information, especially verbal instruction, kind of processes a little slower. You could probably be evaluated for a learning disability. But again, it's another reason why we're overlooked, because we're not hyperactive, we're not moving around. We just can't focus, and our head is kind of fogged all the time and so forth. So when I was younger, I used to zone out so much and so deep that you couldn't get my attention. You might have had to come over and tap me on the shoulder, and even then it was kind of an iffy, but couldn't snap your fingers, couldn't call my name, nothing. I was just totally into my thoughts. As a matter of fact, it happened so often that my family actually had a running joke about it. To me, it wasn't that funny, but we'll get into that in future videos. Anyway, they used to say that I was off visiting a fictitious planet called Zorion. As a matter of fact, I was the president of Zorion. So every time I zoned out, I was off doing presidential duties, like making sure my people had food and water and so forth. Trust me, they had a whole storyline. As a matter of fact, they probably had enough to write a book about it. So it kind of feels like my family's laughing at me. They weren't doing it maliciously, they were just doing it to have fun and so forth, but it does feel like my family is laughing at me. But then now you move it into school and you're zoning out in school, teacher asks a question, you get called on. I really think some of my teachers called on me because they knew I wasn't paying attention. But once you're called on, I had two options. I could either try to answer the question, which most likely ended up being way off, or I could just admit that I wasn't paying attention. Either way, the whole class is gonna laugh at me. And so now I have my family laughing at me, I have me laughing at me, and that's where the mask starts to develop. Because now I developed into the funny guy, because I want people to laugh with me rather than at me. And it worked for a while. Granted, I was still getting in trouble. Why? Because I was interrupting classes, I was disturbing people, I was talking to people, I was trying to make anybody and everybody laugh because I was so afraid that people were laughing at me rather than with me. I don't think people talk about inattentive ADHD all that much. So I'm going to talk about my experiences because I know we're out there and I know that we don't get diagnosed until later on in life. As a matter of fact, we don't get diagnosed until we're adults. I would say late teens at the most. And that's just my opinion, by the way. That's not statistics or anything like that. But if you have any questions about inattentive ADHD, let me know. My experience in general, if you have any experiences that you want to leave in the comments, please do. I would love to read them. With that said, hit the like button. It does help me out. All right? And I'll see you next time.